This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Worries in South Africa as AstraZeneca reveals its vaccines are less effective on the new COVID variant. Fears in the US that Sunday's Super Bowl could be a COVID super spreader event. And day 2 of the African Union Summit as experts call on leaders to chart a recovery path for the continent. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also ahead this hour. A young entrepreneur's unique transport service excites the South African market with plans to rival Uber. And in sports, finalists of the African Nations Championship confirmed with the match set for Sunday. We start the hour with the latest on COVID-19 vaccines. British drug maker AstraZeneca says its vaccine offers only limited protection against mild disease caused by the South African variant of COVID-19. Now, this follows a test on a group of 2,000 people. The study by South Africa's Wits University and the UK's Oxford University showed the vaccine had significantly reduced efficacy against the South African variant, but it still appears to be fully effective in preventing hospitalization and death caused by other variants of the coronavirus. South Africa received 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine on Monday, but is yet to begin rolling them out. Well, for more on this, let's now go to Durban in South Africa, where we're joined via Zoom by Professor Willem Hanekom. He is the director of the Africa Health Research Institute and also co-leads a consortium of scientists in South Africa looking into that new COVID-19 variant. Professor, thank you so much for your time. Firstly, what are the implications of this revelation that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is less effective against this new South African variant of the coronavirus?
Hi, Lindy. I think this would be very concerning if this is true. So unfortunately, at the moment, we have not seen the results ourselves. We've only heard the results first through an article that was distributed overnight, and then very limited results released by AstraZeneca. So we need to see the results, because the important part is what you mentioned earlier, is whether this vaccine protects against severe disease. So that's really what we want to prevent. We want to prevent hospitalization and death. And so far, all the vaccine trials that have been out there have been able to do that. So that's really the outcome that I'd like to look at. I'd also like to see from those results how reliable that study would be. How big was the study? Are the results reliable enough for us to reach conclusions at this stage? So for example, 4 days ago, another study was released from the UK where they looked at whether the same vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, would be effective against the variant that had emerged in the UK, and it was shown to be effective. So, so we need to see the full results.
Of course, as you say, the full results have not been shared with the scientific community in South Africa. But at this point, are you advising that the South African government should continue to import and use this AstraZeneca vaccine?
I cannot give any advice as such. I have no opinion about that without seeing the results. I think it's very, very important for AstraZeneca and the investigators that actually did this vaccine trial to now have urgent discussions with the South African government to see what the implications are of this result. So as I've said, if there is still prevention against severe disease or death, then I think that's more than enough reason to roll out the vaccine. If not, I think we have to seriously think about what we're going to do.
And are there other vaccine options that South Africa is considering at the moment?
Yeah, South Africa has been quite late in getting to the market, in trying to acquire vaccines compared to some other countries of similar wealth. But some other vaccines have already been acquired. For example, some of the Pfizer vaccine has been acquired, but ultimately we have to acquire something like 80 million dosages to vaccinate about 40 million people. And again, we would have to look at whether these vaccines are actually working against the variant of the virus, which is exactly the same virus, it's just changed, but this virus has emerged in South Africa. And we need to see whether those vaccines are working against that variant. And already results from two other vaccines have emerged. And for both of these vaccines, there is protection. There seems to be protection against the variant. It's not as good as it may be against other variants, but there is protection against the variants. And again, to emphasize, there's excellent protection even against this variant in terms of severe disease and death.
Professor Willem Hanekom, thank you so much for your time, joining us there live from Durban in South Africa. Now, turning to Europe, Spain has approved the AstraZeneca vaccine, but like some other EU countries, it won't be offering the jab to the elderly, and that's due to a lack of data. The news comes as officials in Madrid confirm the first ever case of the variant first detected in Brazil. Rahul Pathak reports from Madrid.
Spain has become the latest country not to approve AstraZeneca's coronavirus vaccine for the elderly. The country's health ministry said the jab would be given to 18 to 55-year-olds, only citing a lack of data on its use amongst the older members of the population. Spain joins Germany, France and Italy, among others, in restricting the vaccine's use.
I think it's good news regarding the delays with the other vaccines. It's good that we're getting more supplies from this other company. It's great to achieve herd immunity.
It's a good decision because the trials of AstraZeneca vaccine didn't include people over 55 years old. Also, people older than 55, we have less innate immunity, so they will react worse to the AstraZeneca vaccine. Of course, it will help everybody between 18 and 55 years. Now that we have a shortage, it will cover a big spectrum of the population.
Now, Spain is due to take delivery of 1.8 million AstraZeneca doses this weekend as it tries to speed up the pace of inoculation to try and help it reach its target of 70% of the population vaccinated by the summer. However, it's the appearance of new strains of coronavirus that's causing most concern here. Friday saw the country record its first ever case of the variant first discovered in Brazil, when a 44-year-old man who had flown into Madrid from Brazil tested positive on arrival. Like Spain, Italy is also due to take delivery of its first batch of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine in the next few days. And like Spain, it's limiting its use to people under the age of 55. The EU has come under attack over the slow distribution of the vaccines, while former member Britain was able to get its supplies of the drug.
What would we say today if France and Germany were competing for vaccines to buy and to produce? It would be a messy scene, and it would be counterproductive on an economic level and on a sanitary level above all, because we will only be done with this pandemic as Europeans when we vaccinate a sufficient portion of our populations.
However, if the rate of new variants keeps increasing, the EU's current squabbles over the COVID-19 vaccines may well become irrelevant. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
And to the United States now, where some officials fear the Super Bowl will be a super spreader event, as only about 8% of the population has received their first coronavirus jabs. Toby Muse has the details.
It's the biggest sporting event here in the United States. The Super Bowl is to be played on Sunday. Health experts are urging fans to avoid watch parties. They fear that could lead to a spike in new coronavirus infections.
My biggest concern, quite frankly, is tomorrow, is Super Bowl Sunday, in which, people will get together. And in some cities, if you got 25 people together for Super Bowl Sunday in a party, the chances of having one person with COVID among those individuals depends on the city, but in some cities like LA, is over 50%.
This year sees the Kansas City Chiefs and Tampa Bay Buccaneers face off in the middle of a pandemic. Normally, the Super Bowl is watched in groups, either in bars or at private homes, with people in close quarters shouting and cheering at the action. The mayors of Tampa and Kansas City have urged fans to celebrate responsibly. Recently, with big calendar events, we have seen spikes after Thanksgiving and Christmas. There are fears that with the rollout of the vaccine, people are tired of the pandemic and they could let their guard down and celebrate with friends and family at a Super Bowl party. One Tampa business owner summed up the mood.
And this is our city, this is, the energy, and especially from being that downtime of COVID, people stuck at home, people depressed of not making money, not going to work, XYZ. I think this is kind of the release and get that joy.
According to one survey, a third of the US watched the Super Bowl last year, many watching it in a party. This comes as the number of coronavirus tests has been going down for more than 2 weeks. In the middle of last month, there were over 2 million tests administered a day. This had dropped down to 1.7 million by the beginning of February. Experts want to see at least 2 million tests a day to ensure they're keeping track of new outbreaks and the effectiveness of the vaccine. The number of positive coronavirus test results are also down. A number of factors could explain the decline in the number of positive test results for the coronavirus. One could be fewer tests, fewer positive results. The other could be the vaccine, although it's been a slow rollout, could be cutting the transmission for this virus. Toby Muse reporting for CGTN, Arlington, Virginia.
Now, in Tunisia, hundreds of students and professors have been infected with COVID-19 after the resumption of the academic year at some universities. Learning institutions do have protocols in place to limit the spread of the virus. However, a second wave is still raging in the North African country. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi with more.
There are more than 40,000 students at the University of Tunis. The Ministry of Higher Education and the Ministry of Health put in place strict COVID-19 protocols at this public institution.
Many agents are in charge of enforcing the prevention measures at all gates on campus. Face masks are mandatory and social distancing must be observed. The university provides face masks and hand sanitizers for the students who cannot afford these necessary products.
Many students said that going to university is both risky and challenging during the pandemic. Some teachers have created online groups to share course material and mock exams. A study by the Ministry of Higher Education reveals that more than 90% of Tunisian students are not happy about long-term online learning and prefer returning to campus.
Studying during the pandemic is not easy. We were supposed to follow courses online, but many students lack internet access. Attending in class and on campus is important for social life. I miss the previous years when we used to gather, study in groups and have fun.
The Ministry of Health declared that all Tunisian universities will reopen in February. Yet health authorities say they will not hesitate to shut down any campus following a COVID-19 outbreak.
I urge all students to respect the health protocols. The threat is real. We want to resume a normal life while avoiding contamination and saving lives. This is the responsibility of the whole society. Breaches of the COVID-19 regulations will therefore not be tolerated.
While many universities are welcoming limited numbers of students, lecture halls have remained empty during the second wave of the pandemic in Tunisia. According to the Ministry of Higher Education and the COVID-19 task force, some infection clusters have emerged in many universities across Tunisia. Epidemiologists assert that COVID-19 outbreaks will occur as students continue to return to campus this month. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Turning to politics now, there is uncertainty in Somalia over the upcoming elections, and that has created a political crisis in the Horn of Africa nation. Leaders from the federal government and regional administrations have failed to strike a deal on the delayed parliamentary, senate and presidential elections. This despite days of talks in central Somalia. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more.
Talks between Somalia's divided leaders has ended without any agreement on the upcoming polls, in what is seen as a major blow to ending the month-long political impasse. The setback now means that an agreed election plan is unlikely before the mandate of the executive expires on Monday. In an address to lawmakers, the Somali president blamed regional leaders of Jubaland and Puntland, while arguing that the federal government has made several concessions over the poll process.
We have agreed to move forward. If we have failed to agree now, we will meet again in order to end this impasse. The election must be, however, based on the election agreements signed by all the leaders on the 17th of September of 2020. I hereby ask Parliament to join the process in convincing our people to join this process.
Opposition lawmakers accuse the president of trying to create a constitutional crisis in the region in order to force joint houses of parliament to extend the mandate of the executive.
The country must go to the polls. The mandate of the president ends in less than 2 days. Extension of the mandate for both parliament and president is out of the question.
After 48 hours, both houses of parliament and relevant political stakeholders must now decide the way forward, as the president's term will be over soon.
For close to 4 days, regional and federal leaders gathered in Dosamareb, the regional capital of the Galmudug state, to address contentious issues raised by some regional states. Puntland and Jubaland raised their objections to the Interim Electoral Commission, accusing it of being made up of the president's allies, civil servants and security personnel. The Gather region standoff also dominated talks, with the Jubaland leader insisting that federal forces must be pulled out of the region before polls can be conducted there. And on Somaliland, authorities are debating on who will have control of the appointment of MPs and senators, as polls cannot take place in Somaliland that's claiming independent status. Experts say a new round of talks must take place in order to avoid a major political crisis.
This was the last attempt at striking a deal, because the mandate of the president ends on Monday. It's unfortunate that the leaders were not able to agree on a clear framework on the way forward. However, office holders must remain in place to avoid a vacuum as per the agreement. What is not clear is when the elections will take place.
For now, the federal parliament is set to debate the next course of action. Meanwhile, opposition presidential candidates have warned against any unilateral move by the government to extend the mandate of the parliament, senate and the president. Instead, they want Somali leaders to prioritize on reaching a political agreement in order to end months-long election dispute. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Libya's Joint Military Committee says the country will start clearing landmines on Wednesday. And thousands march in Myanmar's biggest city, demanding the release of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climate and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. The African Union Summit has entered day 2. The South African president, who's also the chairperson of the African Union, has called for access to loans on better terms to aid Africa's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, in his final speech before handing over to his successor, President Cyril Ramaphosa said even though the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank deployed significant financial resources for the coronavirus outbreak response, more needed to be done. He called for concessional loans, which generally offer more favorable terms than those available on the open market.
An injection of fresh resources by the IMF through reallocating and issuing new special drawing rights with a bias towards the developing world will correct the glaring inequality in fiscal stimulus measures between advanced economies and the rest of the world.
Now, the annual AU summit takes place almost a year now since the first case of COVID-19 was reported on the continent in Egypt. In the 12 months since, the pandemic has upended life in Africa. Healthcare systems have been stretched to capacity, especially in countries like South Africa, where the virus has hit the hardest. Across Africa, though, over 3.5 million people have been infected with the virus, and the death toll has surpassed 88,000. Last year, the pandemic pushed sub-Saharan Africa into its first recession in 25 years. The economic fallout has led to widespread job losses and pay cuts. And according to reports, the continent was in danger of losing up to 30 million jobs, with more than a third of African countries at risk of debt distress. So what can leaders do? Let's now bring in Edwin Okoria, the Africa Executive Director of the advocacy organization One Campaign. He joins us via Skype from Abuja. Edwin, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, let's start there. It's a fairly frightening list of big challenges Africa faces at the moment. What do you think African leaders should focus on? What are their priority areas as they meet for this AU summit?
Thank you for having me. I think the first priority is to put out the fire. And the fire right now is the virus. And the virus is claiming lives. Africa was spared previously compared to other areas. But right now with the second wave, we are seeing a lot of infections on the continent. And so the very first priority is how do we get our people inoculated? And the issue of vaccines really should top the agenda. How does Africa access vaccines right now? And so what we expect that the AU summit, the leaders will be talking about will be how do they increase access? How does Africa get, more info, roll out the vaccines to its own citizens? And as you can see, the rest of the world currently are rolling out, but Africa is still far, far left behind. And so we're hoping that will be the very first on top of the agenda. And how do you get to do this without necessarily indebting African countries further? And so the idea is, how does Africa raise the finance to procure the vaccine that it needs to inoculate its people, at least until they reach herd immunity? I thought that would be kind of top of the agenda. But the AU CDC is currently having a lot of plans for this, and we're hoping that this is really going to materialize.
And of course, raising the finance is something that is a matter of concern. As we've heard Cyril Ramaphosa mention, he's been asking for concessional loans for the continent. Now, we've also seen in the last 12 months calls for debt cancellations. In your view, is this the magic pill? Is this the economic answer to some of Africa's problems?
Let me quickly say that what this pandemic has done is that it has revealed the real structural inequities that we see across the world. So when the whole world came together to commit to achieving the SDGs by 2030, and the whole point about development finance was at the core of this. Basically, how does the countries with the largest population of poor people raise the finance they need to really bring the people out of poverty? The pandemic has come to reveal that the current financing model that particularly affects Africa is just unsustainable. Africans are having access to funds in the financial market at exorbitant prices, at rates that is really not sustainable, because of the fear and the risk that whether for governance reforms, for whatever reasons, they're constantly downgraded. They get credits at very high rates. So right now, the call by Cyril is really, really at the core of the new structure in terms of how do we build back better. Africans need finance to build the infrastructure they need to get their people out of poverty. But with the current rate, it is just unsustainable. Africa will continue to move further and further into debt unless concessional loans, and access to financial market that does not further deepen the debt situation is found. And this is what we are calling for. Like, for instance, we're asking that the multilateral development banks, should really provide that loans right now, what we call the countercyclical loans, so that now that things are not very good and not robust, the loans are still coming in, and then they can have this liquidity. And debt cancellation, or debt relief, as we're calling for generally, is a key part of that in terms of giving liquidity to African countries to be able to face the crisis now, but also structure themselves to pull Africa out of this recession that we've seen in the first time in 25 years.
I mean, you're basically saying that Africa needs vaccines, Africa needs financing, but if we are going to pull ourselves out of this recession, realistically, how soon do you see African nations getting back on their feet, both economically and socially?
It's not going to be an easy one. I will tell you that the predictions are not very good, but unless something is done, and this is an opportunity, there is an opportunity right now for this recovery to come back quicker. Let's start with this. If vaccines are accessed and people can be inoculated or people can be vaccinated, then it's a lot easier to come back on track and continue production. And then the global supply chain can come back on track and then global recovery can happen. But the sooner that happens, that before we can then begin to talk about recovery. But beyond the vaccines and the recovery process that will be hastened, it's also about how does Africa finance its development in the long term in a sustainable way without necessarily going further into debt. And this is the whole point about us, calling for SDRs to be released, the special drawing rights that the IMF shareholders can agree on to be released, so that one, those that are not being utilized, can be reallocated, to fast track development without necessarily burdening taxpayers. So that's the first thing. We talk about the sooner liquidity comes on, the sooner Africa has access to liquidity to finance, to do all of these things in the short term in terms of vaccines, but in the medium to long term in terms of completely restructuring the debt process and access to financial markets. That is the sooner we can get recovery. But until these conversations are had, this might go on for quite some time. But we are hoping that the global leaders will really see this as an opportunity to really provide that leadership, to provide a recovery for Africa, this recovery for the world. I think that's the final word I would say on that.
Indeed, that political will make all the difference. Thank you so much, Edwin Okoria, joining us there from Abuja. He's the Africa Executive Director of the One Campaign. Now let's move to Libya, where the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum has selected new interim leaders for the country. They voted for a new presidency council and prime minister who will guide Libya to general elections in December. Regional and international stakeholders have welcomed the results of the vote and an early sign of endorsing the UN-led political process. Here's Adel Al-Mahraoui with more.
During the next 21 days, Libya's newly selected prime minister must form his new cabinet. Abdelhamid Dbeiba's government must get the eastern-based parliament's endorsement during the same period. That could be the government's first challenge, as the Speaker of the Parliament's list has just lost to Dbeiba's in Friday's vote. The runoff vote had two final lists, each including a prime minister and 3 presidency council members. The UN, however, has proposed that the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum would be given the power to endorse the new cabinet if the parliament doesn't.
They approved that mechanism because they fear that the parliament may obstruct for the second time the formation of the government, like what happened back in 2015. Fayez al-Sarraj's government did not, for 5 years, get endorsed by the parliament. This time, they have a backup plan.
Beside the Prime Minister, Friday's vote selected 3 politicians from the south, west and east to form a new presidency council. Libya's interim executive authority must lead the nation to general elections in December. In addition, they must plan for a constitutional referendum while maintaining the current ceasefire.
One of the key tasks of the new government is national reconciliation, the need to build upon the trust and confidence that has been developed in the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum. And that would be a key responsibility of the Presidency Council, particularly with regards to return of IDPs and those who have had to leave the country for people to be able to go back home.
Almost all Libyan factions have been represented in the UN-led selection process. Regional and international powers who have been supporting rival factions in Libya have welcomed the outcomes of Friday's voting. Some Libyan entities, including the Western-based Council of State, has accepted the results. The Libyan National Army and its rival militias are yet to announce their official stance. Adel Al-Mahraoui, CGTN, Cairo.
Staying with Libya, a joint military committee says the country will start clearing landmines from Wednesday. The plan is part of a ceasefire deal brokered by the United Nations last year, and it's also to prepare for the reopening of a coastal road between the eastern and western parts of the country. The committee also welcomed the new Presidency Council and a unified government. They will govern the country until elections are held at the end of this year. Interim Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Mohamed Dbeiba hailed a new political map on Saturday, saying he will form a cabinet and present its program within 3 weeks. Food rights activists in Uganda are campaigning to have quality food served in public spaces. They want to reduce the growing threat of non-communicable diseases that come from poor dietary intake. Here's more from CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga.
Teopista Nabayego is a street food vendor. She's been doing this job for 6 years now, and she specializes in steamed dishes.
The ingredients I put in my food include onions, tomatoes, water, and hooves. I do not add any chemicals or any other spice.
Her recipe is attracting traditional food lovers.
The benefit of this food is that you get the natural ingredients. First and foremost, right from the stage of preparation, it is not fried with cooking oil, but just boiled.
Cow hooves are a delicacy in Uganda, and those who enjoy this dish say it is healthy and nutritious. Food rights campaigners are now pushing to have more of these dishes served to the public.
We need healthy diets at all times with no excuse. Whether in prison, whether in hospital, whether in schools, whether everywhere. Health diets should be the minimum standard.
The move is in line with the new World Health Organization framework that requires that food served and sold in public settings is healthy. The framework also aims at reducing consumption of sodium and salt, sugars, fats, and also addresses the challenge of inadequate consumption of whole grain, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. And the Uganda government is adopting this action plan.
We are engaging all our communities. We're engaging the schools, such that the schools that are serving meals must balance out this diet. The diners are sensitized on the quality of food they should serve the people.
According to the Global Nutrition Report 2020, more than 10% of the adult population in Uganda are living with obesity. And some of the common non-communicable diseases include hypertension, heart diseases, diabetes, and cancer.
If the foods that are prepared there are improved to be, let me say, healthy for everyone, it could help to reduce the deaths due to trans fats in the diet.
Food rights activists believe efforts towards increased dietary intake will help prevent more Ugandans from acquiring non-communicable diseases. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
International news now. Protests over Monday's military takeover in Myanmar are intensifying. Thousands of people are rallying in Yangon, the country's biggest city, demanding the immediate release of ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Internet access and most phone services have been suspended. On Saturday, tens of thousands took to the streets in multiple cities. Myanmar nationals living in Thailand have also demonstrated outside a UN office in Bangkok. Indonesia and Malaysia are pushing for a special meeting of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. Myanmar is also a member of that bloc. The group has a policy of non-interference in its members' domestic issues. So will this meeting, if held, go against this policy? CGTN's Rian Malta reports from Kuala Lumpur.
The call for a meeting in itself does seem to fly in the face of this sacrosanct principle that ASEAN has of not interfering or intervening in the affairs of its fellow ASEAN members. But Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin said that the military takeover in Myanmar was a big setback for ASEAN, and he said that it was a threat to ASEAN's peace and stability. And both Muhyiddin Yassin, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, and Jokowi, the President of Indonesia, have called for this special meeting. But it seems to me unlikely that that will happen. Now, we've already heard from the leaders of some of the ASEAN countries. We've heard from the leaders of Thailand, Cambodia, and the Philippines saying that this is an internal matter. What we saw in the past with Myanmar, and this is far from the first test that ASEAN has faced from internal politics in Myanmar, when we saw Aung San Suu Kyi being detained for all those years, when we saw the Rohingya crises, ASEAN resisted international calls to exert a great deal of pressure on Myanmar. Instead, it stuck with its principles of non-intervention, and it chose the approach of sort of backroom diplomacy, of less strident statements, sort of urging conciliation, urging compromise. And it clearly, ASEAN remains very reluctant to use any kind of stick, to take any punitive action of any kind.
Well, time for a short break. Your business news up next. Coming up, a young entrepreneur's unique transport service excites the South African market with plans to rival Uber.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
A South African electric transport service looks set to rival Uber. According to industry insiders, Scooter RSA is touted to put a spin on the South African e-hailing transport market. It's the innovation of a young entrepreneur, Fezile Dlamini. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
This is Soweto-born Scooter RSA founder Fezile Dlamini. Dlamini launched his online-based taxi service after ride-hailing services Uber and Taxify rejected his job application a number of times. So he used that rejection to start his own company. Dubbed the Green Scooter, the entrepreneur's e-hailing service functions via an app. It works the same way as Uber and Taxify, except that the mode of transport is an electric scooter with a roof.
So Green Scooter is an automotive company manufacturing electric vehicles. We started off with importing, and then we later went on to assembling the vehicles locally. And so far, it's bootstrapped, a self-funded business, and we've been pretty much trying to prove sustainability of electric vehicles within a township environment or any environment whatsoever.
The service offers ride-sharing, food delivery and logistics services through its app. One of its distinguishing elements is its operations in a number of townships.
I would say the unique element is it's connecting the disconnected. I mean, one of the most important things is that, as much as you leave the township and you go and stay in the suburbs, you leave a part of you behind. And food is the one thing that we really, really love the most, that connects us to our roots, to our heritage.
Green scooters also operate in more affluent areas.
The green scooter vehicles are eco-friendly and they emit zero carbon emissions, therefore causing less harm to the environment.
So the ZB is 100% electric. It has a 4 kilowatt battery. Top speed of 60 kilometers an hour. Average driving speed is about 42.5 kilometers an hour. Battery range is 90 kilometers from a single charge. So you use a normal 2-phase, 3-phase plug point to charge the vehicle.
Dlamini's ultimate goal is to expand the service to include a scooter assembly plant here in South Africa, with the aim to contribute in a substantial way to the creation of jobs.
So the future plan for Green Scooter is for us to eventually launch our factory. Our factory plans is that we plan on manufacturing 3,000 vehicles within our first year. Our conservative approach would be to manufacture about 500 vehicles within our first year and sell those. With that, it's creating a lot of sustainable employment opportunities.
The social entrepreneur is also keen to expand to the rest of the African continent. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, the capital of Colombia has acquired almost 1,000 new electric buses for its public transportation system. The purchase makes Bogota one of the cities outside of China with the largest fleet of completely electric buses. Michelle Beg has more from Bogota.
Environment-friendly and state-of-the-art technology is coming to Bogota. The city's public transportation system has announced it has acquired nearly 1,000 new electric buses. By next year, the city's fleet will total nearly 1,500.
We, Bogota, are entering a period of being at the vanguard, not only in Latin America, but in the world. Santiago de Chile has also had important advances, and we have both been working on helping the environment in our cities and in the operation of the electric buses.
Chinese automobile manufacturer BYD won several bids to provide Bogota with its electric buses. The first contract was for 470 buses, which were delivered last year. BYD reports that the new order of 1,000 purely electric buses is the largest that any company has gotten outside of China.
Once these buses are up and running, the reduction of CO2 emissions will be 87,000 tons a year. This number is important and will affect the quality of air in Bogota and the quality of life of inhabitants.
Bogota's public transportation officials say there are challenges in acquiring new technologies. One of them is the need to build the infrastructure and personnel necessary to facilitate the operation and management of the vehicles. It's a challenge the city has committed to take on in the last couple of years. While the first batch of electric buses came fully assembled from China, this new order will have the participation of Colombia's automotive industry.
With the new bids for contracts, we wanted to support the national industry more, so part of the requirement was for the company's proposals to include assemblies of the buses in Colombia.
The new bus fleet will begin to circulate this year, and officials expect to have it fully operational in the first half of 2022. Michelle Vega, CGTN, Bogota, Colombia.
Community-based group buying has been helping Chinese through the pandemic. So how does it work? Our reporter Yu Yang finds out.
Liu Xiujuan is the leader of a buying group at the Binghedongli community in Beijing's Daxing district. Along with the group members, she uses a WeChat group to gather orders and negotiate lower prices when buying fruits, vegetables, and other daily necessities.
Our community buying group has about 600 members. They are all residents here. Some are young, some are old. For older people who can't use phone all that well, we help them with their orders.
Liu works with Chengxin Youxuan, a fresh produce and grocery community e-commerce platform, and the Chinese ride-hailing giant Didi Chuxing. After receiving the group's orders from Liu, the platform ships the goods in bulk to her, resulting in lower logistics costs and increased platform efficiency.
During the pandemic, people feel it isn't safe to go out and shop. Our services have brought a much-needed convenience.
Liu has a store here in the community. Every time she receives goods from the e-commerce platforms, she will place them here, and the customer will come to pick up what they have purchased.
I usually place an order in the evening and the goods arrive the next morning. I pick them up every time I get off work. It's very convenient.
The group buying platform is very good. The vegetables and fruits are very fresh. We don't need to worry about going to markets with the pandemic going on.
Didi started its community-based group buying business in June 2020. The service is currently offered in the cities of Beijing, Chengdu, Wuhan, and Guangzhou.
We have a strict process of selecting products because most of what we offer is vegetables and fruit. We must make sure they're fresh when they're delivered.
The company says it started the business because of small stores losing business amid the pandemic. By combining Didi's e-commerce platform with the geographical advantages of the stores, it benefits both stores and residents.
We will further expand our group buying business in the future. For example, in Beijing, most of our current groups are in the city's south. We'd gradually like to expand northward.
Didi isn't the only company to cash in on community group buying. Internet titans Alibaba, JD.com, and Meituan have poured big money into this budding sector. But some experts say it may only further hurt small vegetable vendors, adding that long-term consumer interest may also be compromised if the vegetable market becomes monopolized. Yu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
Nigeria and other African countries are set to explore their rich arts and cultural diversity. This has been one of the discussion points at the 34th AU Summit for Heads of State and Governments that ends on Sunday. The continent, which lost some of its cultural artifacts during the colonial era, is now pushing for a chance to preserve its heritage. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with more.
From the Nok and Ife terracotta to the Benin bronzes and ivories, Nigerian history is rooted in cultural heritage. The unique antiquities found across the country paint a picture of Nigeria's ancient civilization. But in the 19th century, colonialists invaded and looted its finest arts, stealing a key part of the country's cultural identity.
So, where we would have been today if they have allowed us to develop the way we were developing? Because you look at us today, we as people, we are in the middle of nowhere. We cannot keep our African culture and we cannot meet up with the Western culture. You look at our history. For example, the Benin's history, we were not writing and we were not writing things, but our history were kept in Benin in the artifacts. So you could pick one single artifact and it will tell you the story of that generation. Those things were taken away from us.
It is believed that Nigeria may have lost billions of dollars worth of antiques through that looting, although no official estimates exist to back that claim. Africa has been fighting to restore these artifacts, and that's why conversations at the 34th AU Assembly target rebuilding and leveraging on Africa's diverse heritage. This will amplify African governments' efforts to ensure the return of precious artifacts stolen.
From the fact that they are stolen and they have to be returned back to the rightful owners, is generating millions and billions of dollars, not naira, for museums all over the world, particularly in Europe. Fortunately, these museums will never tell the visitors how these artifacts came about. They will just tell them they are from Africa or not even Benin. But we are also letting these visitors know that these artifacts are products of theft of a civilization that was almost annihilated.
Artifacts of Nigerian origin are major museum attractions in Europe. They've helped boost their tourism sector. If returned, the government would be tasked with the responsibility of preserving and protecting them while attracting similar interests as they have in Europe.
We have a dedicated agency, the National Museum and Monument. They have a very good facility where we can keep all of this now. Maybe before now, we didn't take much interest in getting enough facilities where we can keep them. But I'm assuring you today, we have standard and treated facilities to keep all these artifacts now.
The struggle to repatriate the artifacts has yielded some gains, including the return in the year 2020 of a 600-year-old terracotta head. Nigeria and Africa continue to push for the return of these artifacts, which art historians say is key to reclaiming and nurturing the African identity. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Your sports news coming up next.